Good morning, CityCoiners. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the CityCoin podcast. If you don't know me, my name is Jake Blockchain. I'm part of the CityCoiner squad. I also have Sean here. How you doing, Sean?
Doing great, Jake. Never better.
Love to hear it. And today, for this first episode, we have Mel Anic from Theopetra here. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good. It's good to have you. I've kind of seen you guys around popping up on the Twitter sphere. And then what really caught my eye was your builders call recently, displaying some interesting things that you guys are thinking about as far as tweaking the CityCoins model. And I thought it was simplistic in the tweaks you did, but really profound because it does hit a lot of the things that are kind of like issues we're seeing. So we got a lot to cover, and we'll do as much as we can in this kind of half hour, but people are going to have to dig deep after the fact because there's so much here. But just broad strokes, what is Theopetra for people that aren't familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about Theopetra as kind of like a lab developing in real estate solutions, right? So we are fairly blockchain agnostic, and think about it as we are essentially real estate maxis trying to develop real estate solutions and projects that are interesting, fun, and something just completely different from what you see in the space, right? That where we won't go the traditional route. We're gonna, oftentimes we'll kind of experiment, we'll try different things, but we want to kind of test the market a little bit and kind of see how everything kind of plays out. And the first thing that we are launching is going to be REIT, which is what you heard on the CityCoins podcast. So,
okay, and what does REIT stand for? Because when I hear REIT, I think it's REIT, which is like Real Estate Investment Trust. Is that what you're saying, or is it something else?
It's real estate for all today. So it's a play on REIT, REIT, but it's real estate for all today. That's what the name kind of stands for there. Okay. So very close. Absolutely.
Okay. And what inspired Theopetra? I know it's a broad question, but you guys are attacking one of the most foundational needs that everyone has, which is your safety as far as your housing. So what inspired what you're working on?
Yeah. So to kind of paint the picture a little bit, back in 2015, I joined the real estate industry, and at the same time, I was kind of learning about crypto as well. And the minute I got in, I went into residential sales. I jumped into that kind of realm. I quickly grew that business to a decent amount. I had about $100 million in residential sales. It was growing pretty steadily. And I wanted to kind of venture out into just kind of different realms. And the first thing that I kind of noticed was real estate was way easier than I thought it was going to be, just from the context of how it's kind of operational, And I ventured into real estate investing in the sense of, home flipping and buying rentals and stuff like that. And I ended up kind of connecting with real estate fund managers, people that were managing a hell of a lot more real estate than I ever thought, was even possible. It was $200 million, $500 million with real estate. And it was one of those situations, I'm sure you guys can relate, where you kind of peek behind the curtain and you're almost disappointed in a way. You're like, man, like I thought it was so different, but it's so unimpressive. And it wasn't what I thought it was. And to give everyone context, essentially what happens in the real estate fund world is you buy a building and you do what's called a capital improvements, right? Which is just very simply put, you raise money, you buy a building, and you call your property manager and say, hey, change the carpets, paint the walls, raise the rents, right? When I saw that, I was like, that's all you do? You call the property manager and you tell them to raise the rents, paint the walls, do yada, yada, yada. And I was like, there's no way that feels good, right? Like there's no way that you can feel good doing that business model where your entire business model is predicated on buying a building, raising the rents, and selling it to the next guy, right? And that was kind of my clicking moment where I was a little disappointed, I think. And I was just kind of like, man, I feel like you could do better than that. And the problem I started kind of tackling was, how do we flip this thing on its head where can you build a model that you don't even have to touch the rents and still outperform these guys who are running this game of, I'm going to raise the rents, flip it to the next guy. He's going to raise rents. He's going to flip it to the next guy. I've been fascinated by the problem of, can you build a model that you don't even have to touch the rents and you can still outperform the former industry. And that was what kind of inspired me to start building.
Okay. Sean, you got anything you want to jump in here with?
Yeah. So Mel, so it sounds like you were trying to find a way to make profit from another way and actually pass that on as savings to renters. Is that right?
Yes. So we want to pass on the savings to the renters and create a much more sustainable solution that is sustainable for the long term, right? Where you can still profit the same way you would as a normal fund or firm without having to rely on increasing the rents month over month or year after year over year. So absolutely, that's spot on.
Sure. Now, I think everyone's question is, where does the money come from then? Right? Where is the profit coming from if you're not making it from landlords who typically raise rent and then so forth? If you're kind of reshaping that model, maybe speak a little bit to how that looks.
Absolutely. So to give you guys context on the REIT model, essentially what we're doing is right now there's in the former traditional model, there's only three parties, right? There's a landlord, there's a tenant, and then there's a government. Those are only three parties involved currently. Essentially what we're doing with the REIT model is we're replacing the landlord and we're just simply using POX, right? So essentially all we're really doing is just like CityCoins, we're using the same POX model that CityCoins is doing. The main difference with us is we're displacing the earnings that we're getting from farming or from mining, and we're placing that into rental properties. And we're just plugging the cash flows back into the model, which is going to sustain the entire kind of ecosystem with itself, right? So we're just taking the cash flows from the multifamily buildings, converting that to stacks, and mining the asset again, which is effectively sustaining the ecosystem without having to increase the rents.
So Mel, let me make sure I'm understanding too, because I think this is really where the innovation is for a lot of it, right? So you are still collecting rent on tenants, correct?
Yes.
First off, okay. And so you're taking that rent. Are you making money on this rent?
Yes.
Is there a profit margin to expect on this? There is. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so you'll take this revenue, you'll take this profit in excess, and you will mine your own coin with it through proof of transfer light, correct?
Completely correct. Yes.
Is that right? Okay, cool. Okay. And so proof of transfer light, because there's a lot of people who aren't familiar with how CityCoins works, right? So you essentially contribute stacks to a smart contract, and through a lottery function, you will return or receive a community coin back, right? In this case, it would be, or in the former cases, it would be like Miami coin or New York City coin. And in this case, it would be REIT. Is that right?
That is completely correct. Yes. Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I apologize. Maybe I should have given more context on proof of transfer. I wasn't sure the audience kind of type here as well, but absolutely. I think I would even go as far as to say that proof of transfer is probably one of the best innovations to crypto since Bitcoin itself. It is incredibly profound, right? Where in Bitcoin's proof of work network, essentially what's going on is miners are burning energy in order to get Bitcoin back, right? So there's energy being burned, capital essentially being burned to gain a profitable resource, which is Bitcoin. I would say Bitcoin is as close to perfect as you can get. The only downside is when that energy is burned, it's just kind of evaporated in a way, right? It's just kind of gone. What I think proof of transfer does very elegantly is there's now a receiver on the other end, and you're transferring one asset to mine another, and now there's a receiver on the other end, right? So now there's a beneficiary on the back end of that. So in the proof of transfer network, you're essentially sending stacks, which is a liquid asset, to mine another asset, which in our case is REIT. And the main difference is now there's a community on the back end of it that is actually receiving stacks, which I think is extremely elegant and a very, very interesting way to incorporate in the community. So now when miners send stacks, they're earning REIT, and now there's a beneficiary, which is a community on the back end of that.
Okay. And so will you have to hold REIT then in order to either be in these properties? Is that the second leg to this then, that you, as a token holder, you get access to Theopetra properties?
That's a great question. So from the perspective of the tenants themselves already living in the building, nothing changes for them at all, right? They just live their lives, pay their rent in US dollars. They probably won't even know that, we ended up buying the building. They're just living their lives, paying the rent in the US dollars. The only key difference is that we are just taking those US dollars, converting that to stacks, and just sending it right back to the network again, right? So we're just remining the assets constantly with those flows.
Yeah, that's really smart. So digitally, you're just setting up the structure where you're creating this feedback loop of dividends almost, where instead of the money going into the landlord's pocket, you're actually redistributing it through proof of transfer light.
That is completely correct. Yeah. So what REIT is going to be is it's a nonprofit organization. We just buy the building, and 100% of our flows get converted to stacks and just sent right back to the system, right? So now you have a very predictable, sustainable miner that never stops accumulating, and it just keeps going through the system again. And as we keep propping in more properties, the feedback loop gets stronger and faster over time as well. So that's completely correct.
I see. Yeah, it's really smart. And so a lot of people are probably wondering, like, how can I trust this, right? This is all so new. This is very confusing. And, have you thought about how you plan to gain some of that trust with new renters or your new tenants, perhaps?
Yeah. So the first thing that we're going to do, which I think is going to be pretty cool, is with the tenants, we're going to send them a letter and saying, hey, you and your families are good. No rent increases, past 1% for the next 3 to 5 years, right? So that's going to be the first thing we're going to do. For the tenants, I mean, their upside is they don't really have to trust us. They just sign a rental agreement and they just pay their rent and they kind of live their lives. I think the biggest kind of trust factor is going to come in from the community, just because this is a little more centralized than some other projects, right? So there is going to be a centralization component there. We will use whatever technology we have to our disposal to make it as decentralized as possible. But I'm under the opinion that I don't think real estate will ever be fully decentralized. There's still some subjective opinions that have to go into it, and stuff like that as well. So my main thesis is I think time and market equals trust, from there as well. I think the longer we're alive and we kind of produce, I think the more trust we'll gain over time.
Perfect. Well said. I'd love to double click a little bit on some of the nuances of the REIT model. So there's I've seen some things with percentages. So as you mine on the current model, it's something like 80% goes to stackers, and then is it 5 goes to a home ownership program, and then the other 15 goes to multifamily. Is that correct?
Yeah. So to break it down, at CityCoins right now is doing 70-30, which is 70% towards the community, 30% towards the city. We are doing 18-15-5. So 80% is going back towards the community. We want to prioritize community as much as possible. 15% goes towards a nonprofit, which will be purely used to just buy more buildings and just keep plugging it back into the network. And then the 5% will be used to bring in institutional partners and just these larger players, right? We want to have an arm where we can optimize and bring in institutions in a way that they don't have to constantly keep they don't have to go in and touch a lot of crypto, right? So the 5% will be going in towards bringing in a institutional arm and actually having them also plug into the network and scale us as fast as possible from there as well.
Okay. And is that still buying multifamily, or is that buying different kind of properties?
That's also multifamily as well. Absolutely. Yeah. So that'll also be multifamily plug-in in as well.
Okay. And then if we switch towards what you suggested at the CityCoins call, which I found super interesting, how does that switch slightly? The numbers adjust a little bit.
Yeah. So what I propose to CityCoins, I think right now what they're dealing with is what I call mercenary capital, which is a miner going in and, they're just going in and they're mining the asset and they're essentially selling it on the open market. Right. And I don't think it's anything that CityCoins did wrong. It's very common actually in the Ethereum ecosystem. You see that all the time. It's called yield farming and mercenary capital. What I'm proposing to CityCoins, and I think what they could do is, instead of 30% going towards a city, I think setting a budget aside for, affordable housing. It could be any business, really. It could be rehab centers. It could be anything that generates cash flow, and simply converting that back to stacks and plugging it right back in and sustaining their ecosystem. I'm proposing affordable housing because we already have the team in place to kind of set them up and help them out. So if they ever wanted to do that, they could always reach out, and we could always help them buy real estate and kind of do affordable housing for the city as well.
Cool. And this would come from like how we see in Miami, well, they take a chunk of their treasury wallet and put it into your nonprofit, and you guys will go off and do your due diligence and do what you can, and then provide that for the city. Is that the mechanism? Or how can CityCoins bring this into their protocol? Is there different layers where some could do it from the wallet and send it to you and kind of like contract you out, versus some can? I thought I saw something about maybe future cities, you could put it at the protocol level and it's just baked into how the splits get divvied up. Did I see that correctly?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to be is just bake it right into the protocol and have like a set amount going towards buying real estate or whatever it is for that city, right? It could be rehab centers, it could be Bitcoin mining for green energy, it could be a lot of different things, right? For the sake of simplicity, I think affordable housing would be like the first easy step. And you just saw recently where Suarez, I think he sold off like 5 million to put into affordable housing, ironically enough, right? I think the issue is the community is always going to want to see audits, like where did that money go? Who are the middlemen? How is that helping out the community and the project itself as well, kind of long-term too, right? So we would be able to do the same result where, if they just kind of baked it in, we could buy the affordable housing for them, audit it, just kind of facilitate everything, take the cash flows, remind the CityCoin, and then that way it's accomplishing the same result, and the project is also sustaining long-term as well.
Okay. And I think that's something that's powerful about blockchain and this like distributed ledger is that everything is on chain. So everything can be audited. And I saw that early on with real estate. People are like, oh man, everything's going to be on chain. You can just kind of pull it and see it. But I can imagine there's so many different pieces of government and different companies that it's going to take a while to make that process efficient and ready for that kind of action. How are you guys thinking about from the jump, bringing things on chain, doing things transparent, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So in the very beginning, I'm a big believer in let's just move fast and we kind of figure things out as we go along. So in the very beginning, we're going to just do an audit once a quarter by like a third party and, provide that to the community. I think over time, there'll be ways to audit it and bring it on chain in a much more transparent way as well, from there too. As of right now, it's still pretty automated from it's still pretty manual from like the tenant level, right? When the tenant pays rent, it's, in the US dollars, and there's still a lot of things being done manually. Real estate's a very slow, archaic industry. So it's going to take some time to bring them up to the modern world. They don't even accept stable coins yet. It's pretty crazy. So over time, we will implement and kind of, put that in on chain as well, as much as we possibly can as well. But I completely agree with you. I think the future is going to be completely on chain, from, people paying rent to real estate completely to even ownership, from the ownership level as well. I think that'll all be on chain in the future.
Yeah, I can definitely see too how with politicians, everyone kind of has a certain disdain for politicians. And I think most of them mean well and they're doing good work. It's just the transparency aspect. It feels like a black box up in City Hall and no one really knows what's going on until we get some of these kind of like memorandums and things to come down. I got another question or two, but Sean, anything you want to pop in here with?
I just let it fly, Jake. I'll jump in after you. I got a couple of questions that I'm interested about how Mel got his start here, but before Jake.
I think the last question I'm really curious about is, one of the beautiful things about CityCoins is it was a rethinking from first principles on how to fund and like get people engaged in civic engagement and give cities funding. The old model was always about taxation, and that kind of thing. And you're always either taking from somebody, and people always feel some type of way about that, or you're cutting spending. And so you have to, you can only give so much services. And so CityCoin does this flip where you're focusing on the local, but you're going global and using new technologies in this new novel way. And I'm just curious, like why why is any of the current models that cities and governments can use to assist homeowners and like keep rents down? Like I've seen the two main modes, like the levers they have the pole is rent control and stimulus. And those seem like one is too, it kills the free market mechanism, which has downstream effects. And stimulus is inflationary typically where you're pulling from the budget. So how do you think about cities and how they're kind of stuck, and maybe just reiterate like how you guys kind of fill in and think about these from a different perspective?
Absolutely. I think right now the entire US is kind of backed into a corner where the rents, the millennial generation is right now just getting absolutely crushed, right? Like the inflation is through the roof, rents are going up, home prices are going up. And the only solution that the government has is those two exact levers, which is A, rent control, or B, you print money and give it out to the tenants, right? So you could either A, slow down the rents, or B, compensate the people in those buildings. If you slow down the rents, rents are the largest portion of GDP, or at least top two, like they're right up there. If you slow that down, the money has to come from somewhere, right? And you have to find that capital somewhere, and it's going to come from the middle class payers again, right? So you're going to have to raise taxes, and then once again, the people with assets win, the people with assets don't, right? So, and the secondary thing, you nailed it right on the head, which is stimulus. If you print a bunch of money, that's not going to do anything. You're going to just benefit, the people with stagnant assets again, kind of long term. So, I think the biggest threat to anybody building on chain is always going to be legal. That's 100% building any project on chain is definitely like a legal threat to it. And what kind of gives me a little bit more comfort is we're kind of giving the government almost like a get out of jail free card, right? We're like, hey, look at this model. It works. It's sustainable, yada, yada, yada. Just like how CityCoins is kind of giving them a backdoor out as well. That's kind of like our hedge too. But I agree with you. Those are the only two levers. And both of them, although they're well-meaning, they're not benefiting who they're trying to benefit, from there too. But I do think that rent control will be nationwide. You're already seeing like even conservative states starting to consider implementing it. So I do think America long-term will be rent control kind of like across the nation. And I think the projects and the firms that know how to live in a rent control environment will live long-term.
Perfect. Sean, you want to ask any closing questions for close this beautiful thing down?
Yeah, I think so. Mel, I guess maybe just what's next? What can some of the people expect? When is our first Theopetra property?
Yeah, absolutely. So REIT is launching on Stacks. It'll be on July 4th. We're launching that symbolically. Total free mine. Anybody can go in and mine it. You could obviously just mine it yourself, or B, you could just use Theopetra, and Theopetra can mine for you as well from the Ethereum blockchain. So those are the two main ways you can kind of gain access from there. Absolutely.
That's awesome. And where can people find you?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter, Mel_Anic, and Theopetra Labs as well. And June, July is the target date for right now, and hopefully we'll see a property on Stacks, by Q3, Q4. So hopefully Stacks has the most real estate and we could beat out Ethereum. That's the goal there.
Yeah, let's go.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks, Mel. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, this was a great, fantastic first episode. All the CityCoiners out there, we're engaged in CityCoins to kind of help reshape and rethink what civic engagement looks like using the new tooling that crypto offers. And pretty cool what you just heard about with what Theopetra is doing, trying to rethink how people can buy properties, have that security, and have a sustainable model that exists out of the current mechanisms. So thanks for listening, guys. Mel, Sean, thanks for hopping in. Appreciate you guys.
Cool. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks, guys.